Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. This is a sold-out event, so I'd encourage you to find your seat because it may have been taken, so kindly take your seats. Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome. It is terrific to be back in person. This is our first luncheon event back in person. I haven't seen you guys for a couple of years. What have you been up to? How you been? Okay? Everything's good? Great to have you here. Good afternoon and welcome to Toronto Region Board of Trade's Stronger Than Ever annual luncheon with His Worship, Mayor Tory. I'm Jan De Silva, the board's president and CEO. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land we're meeting on is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and the board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. Our mission at the board is to be a catalyst for business growth and competitiveness across Canada's largest economic zone. Representing more than 11,500 members, we connect, we convene, and we champion. Today, we're delighted to welcome His Worship John Tory for his 6th annual luncheon keynote as Mayor of Toronto. And I'd like to take a moment to talk about our mayor, who is truly a formidable leader. Having had the unenviable position of being mayor of Canada's largest city during a global pandemic, he stewarded us through the last 2 years with a steady hand and an unwavering commitment to the people and businesses of Toronto. And I know this not only because it was evident to every Torontonian, both the haircuts he couldn't get, the sleep he couldn't get, and the fact that he was constantly helping to reassure and calm the community, but also because we worked closely together to develop solutions for the many issues that the businesses in Toronto faced, who were so badly impacted by COVID conditions. So, Mr. Mayor, our city is grateful, our Board of Trade is grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful to have such a capable and consultative partner in our mayor. To Mayor Tory. Now, since our founding in 1845, the annual luncheon is a time to reflect on the year that was and take stock of what lies ahead. This luncheon is no different, but our circumstances are. As our headlines shifted from a 2.5-year pandemic, only to move into the global shocks and disruptions triggered by disrupted supply chains, rising inflation, chronic talent shortages, and Russia's horrific invasion of the Ukraine, globally and locally, we're facing urgent issues. It's easy to forget that even before the pandemic, Toronto was buckling under the weight of our own success. Over the past decade, over 1 million people moved into our region, bringing their skills, their talent, and their ambition. And if this week's record-setting attendance at our Collision Conference is any indicator, we can expect 1 million more soon. Now more than ever, it's essential that we find a way to break through the inertia in addressing the very real growth and competitiveness challenges confronting our country and acutely impacting our members in Canada's largest economic zone, the Toronto-Waterloo Corridor. We need to hit go on mission-critical projects central to sustaining our economy, like housing, transportation, talent development and attraction, and projects for growing our economy through deployment of advanced technologies and realizing our global leadership potential in the climate economy. This is not mission impossible. The pandemic showed us that when the pressure is on, things can get done quickly. When we stop claiming jurisdictional purview or the need for an abundance of bureaucracy, when we stop saying not now to solving the problems at hand, our institutions just get on with it and deliver it quickly. We experienced that through the pandemic, the all-hands-on-deck, hyper-collaborative approach. It worked. Today, the pressure is on. As Toronto and major cities around the world position ourselves for the post-pandemic economy, we cannot lose our sense of urgency, that sense of urgency that got us through the toughest times of the pandemic. Because the truth is, we have fallen behind. According to the OECD, Canada is tracking to have the lowest growth in income per capita among its member countries over the next decade. Ontario ranks 45 out of 64 US and Canadian states and provinces on the same measure. Our region is in the lower tier of North American jurisdictions when it comes to wealth generation, and that's not for the super rich, that's for all members of our society, and that's simply not a recipe for our success. We know what's needed: more immigration, integrated transit across our region, better land use to support houses and jobs, more widespread adoption of advanced technologies, and to be direct, the adoption of our own homegrown technologies here, applying them to the problems that we face. We need to do it now. We can't be busy talking and studying it while competing jurisdictions are busy doing it. For us to compete globally, we must also succeed locally. Over the coming year at the board, we're pursuing 3 initiatives to be a catalyst for business growth and competitiveness. First, our board of directors has embarked on Strategy 2027, a refresh of our strategic plan. This is not a blank piece of paper exercise. We know from our strong engagement with our members what the pain points are and what the opportunities are. Strategy 2027 will deeply focus on how we influence meaningful, timely action that needs to take place across our economic zone of 34 municipalities. The mayor understands this so well and has been a champion and a huge influencer of regional cooperation across those 34 centers. We need our other orders of government to come to the table with us on this. Second, the climate economy. I'm delighted to welcome Young as our new board chair, and I'm proud to announce that our Board of Trade is co-chairing an initiative called the Climate Economy Strategic Council with Mars Discovery District. Working with key stakeholders of the board, we'll be standing up 2 major projects that will deploy innovation to enable climate transition at scale. And coming out of these projects, we'll deliver playbooks for how this can be replicated at similar institutions across the province and the country. And let me tell you, the collective roll-up of these projects will have a meaningful impact on our climate transition goals and also showcase our homegrown innovation powerhouse. And finally, Toronto Inc. I don't know if you heard about it. We joined the mayor at Collision this week to announce the formalization of a supercharged collaboration between Toronto Region Board of Trade, Destination Toronto, and Toronto Global. Working together even more purposefully than we have in the past, our organizations are combining our expertise and resources to showcase Toronto globally and present the case for doing business here. We'll be working together to have a big presence and a big story to tell at select global events annually. Together with the city, we'll make Toronto an even stronger global city and global partner. So our sights are clearly set on being a catalyst for growth and competitiveness, ensuring that our region achieves its full economic and societal potential as Canada's economic engine. We are going to be bold, we're going to be ambitious, and we're going to propose real, meaningful solutions to problems that may otherwise seem overwhelming. And finally, as doors continue to open across the region, so too will ours. This fall, we look forward to welcoming you to our new home, our office and event facilities on Toronto's new waterfront development at 100 Queens Quay. With new meeting spaces and one of the city's most amazing outdoor patios, this is where you'll all come together to connect and grow partnerships and grow our city. So I'd like to take a moment now to say some thank yous. First, to our new chair of our board, Young Wu. Young embodies the best of entrepreneurial can-do energy for solving our complex problems and is an incredibly wonderful partner in our shared goals for the region. A warm thank you to our principal sponsors, Scotiabank, SNC-Lavalin, the Globe and Mail, and University of Toronto, all longtime partners of the board. We're incredibly grateful for your ongoing support and commitment to Toronto Region's success. To our lunch event partners, our visionary partner, the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, our networking reception partner, Leuna, our supporting sponsors, Bell and George Brown College, thank you for continuing to support the board. It's now my pleasure to introduce our head table. Now, I know it's been a while since you've been through this, so let me just give you the rules of engagement here about introducing our head table. You with me here? So what's going to happen, I'm going to ask you to hold your applause until everyone has stood up. And head table, as I call your name, could you kindly stand up or remain standing? You got the rules? Everyone's good to go? Great. Okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Okay. Karen Mazakurich, VP Stakeholder Relations and Communications, Greater Toronto Airports Authority. Oh, good job. Dr. Joseph Mancinelli, International VP and Regional Manager of Central and Eastern Canada, Leuna. Mayor. Elena Tennyson, Partner and Chief Financial Officer, PwC Canada, Treasurer of Toronto Region Board of Trade. Kevin Teslick, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Canadian Banking, Scotiabank, and Co-Vice Chair of the Board of Directors, Toronto Region Board of Trade. Young Wu, CEO Mars Discovery District and Chair of the Board of Directors of Toronto Region Board of Trade. And our keynote, His Worship, John Tory, Mayor of Toronto. And before I let you start with desserts or wait for your lunch, I've got a few other special guests I'd like to recognize here. From City Hall, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, Councillor Scarborough Centre, Chair of Economic Community Development, and a partner in Toronto Inc. Councillor Gary Crawford, Scarborough Southwest, and Chair of the Budget Committee. Tough job. Councillor Nick Manis, Scarborough Agincourt. Councillor? Okay. Councillor Brad Bradford, Beaches East York. Welcome, Brad. Councillor Joe Mihevik, Spadina, Fort York. Former Toronto councillors Joe Cressy and Josh Cole, who are getting lots of sleep these days now that they're out of the fire. To all elected officials and past elected officials throughout the region who join us today, also, fresh from the campaign trail, Amin Massoudi, Principal Secretary to the Premier, and your many colleagues from the Ontario government in attendance. My Toronto Inc. colleagues, Toronto Global CEO Stephen Lund, Destination Toronto CEO Scott Beck. Where's Scott? Scott's over there. Newly doctorated, if that's a term, Dr. Mohammed Al-Zaibak, Toronto Region Board of Trade 2008 Region Builder Award, and the recipient of an honorary doctorate from TMU very recently. I think it's June 16th. Where are you, Mohammed? There we go. Thank you. And I'll quickly acknowledge the amazing board of directors that I have the privilege to work with who are in attendance. If you could please stand as well. Krista Ponsier, Basil Kazi, Sasha Christic, Ansley Wallace, Blaine Woodcock. Thank you for everything you do for us all the time. And finally, an incredibly warm acknowledgement to our many committee members, former members of the board, past employees joining us here today, including Paul Golini, who just completed 6 years on our board of directors. Here's Paul. And our past chairs, Ross Dunsmore and Chris Reidebach, who are joining us here today. And with that, it's now my pleasure to invite our chair, Young Wu, CEO of Mars Discovery District, to the podium. This is his first annual luncheon, so go easy on him, folks, but he's been a tremendous leader. Thank you, Young. Over to you.
The dreaded slot just before lunch is served. Well, thank you for that introduction, Jan. And good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here at my first annual lunch of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Board of Directors, the Mayor's Lunch. But before I begin, I just wanted to recognize our CEO, Jan De Silva, and her wonderful team at the Board of Trade. This team has put themselves out there every single day, every single week of every single month, and over a grueling, absolutely grueling 2 years, just to advocate for our community, for our members. They've worked with tremendous dedication in a highly volatile environment. And they've been designing and running programs to support our membership during just an unprecedented once-in-a-100-year pandemic. So can I ask for a huge round of applause in appreciation for your team from the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Okay, now you know what? We will be properly introducing our special guest shortly, but I think I'd like to call an audible right now and ask for a huge round of applause to recognize the hardest working mayor on the planet, Mayor John Tory. Mayor Tory, I'm convinced that you found a way to clone yourself, maybe during your recent visit to the labs at Mars, because I could swear I've seen you in 2 to 3 places at exactly the same time, several days a week from dawn till dusk, just this 1 week alone. Now, both Jan and Mayor Tory are the leaders that we've needed over this past 2 years to lead from the front lines. They've worked tirelessly to help our community navigate tremendous uncertainty. And if anybody thought that we would be easing our way back from the pandemic, we're now almost an overnight cutover into seeing the emergence from the pandemic, and it's coming like a freight train, and it's missing brakes. So I do want to acknowledge, though, how hard the past 2 years have been for our communities and our families and our businesses and our employees, I'm sure for all of you in this room. Throughout this pandemic, the board has served as the essential connector, convener, and champion for our business community. We've made it our mission to provide members with meaningful connections through our virtual events. We've also created the We're Ready Toronto campaign, which was informed by inputs from more than 350 business leaders, civic leaders, and public health experts. We've worked to ensure that when public health gave the green light to reopen, businesses were ready. We continue to champion real solutions to real problems, working with all 3 levels of government to drive policy that paves the way for a more competitive region. And we do this because our members can't succeed without the right conditions to grow. I strongly believe in the board and its vision to make Toronto one of the most competitive and sought-after regions in the world. And as we look forward, I can't help but actually feel that this is a time for renewal. At a time when we have a bit of a blank canvas to paint upon, we can design the future of our business community together. Just last week, I had a chance to chair our annual meeting of members, and as part of that, we elected 4 new people to our board of directors. Now, I'm proud to say that for the first time, the number of women directors exceeds the number of men. This is a historic achievement. It's kind of timely, given that next year is actually the 50th anniversary of the board admitting women as members. That seems a bit funny coming out of my mouth that there was ever a time when the board did not admit members, but I think we should just take that and just run with it. I'm also really happy to share that with our new directors, visible minorities make up 30% of our board. This is a drastic improvement from the single-digit percentage just 5 years ago. It all makes a difference. We live in the most diverse city in the world, and diversity of lived experience brings diversity of thought. And diversity of thought brings the innovation and transformation and resilience that we need, especially at times like this. These are key ingredients to building and continuing to build ourselves as a global urban center, which is already a destination for the people and the talent that can build the future of this great community. But our organization and our membership is also built on an incredible 177 years of tradition. Did I get that right, Jan? Amazing. At last week's annual meeting, we also took some time to honor and celebrate individuals and organizations who've been members continuously for a long time. So I would like to specifically point out Roy Craik and Ronald DeBoer Sr., 2 members who've maintained their membership for 60 years. That is incredible. So a special shout out to the anniversary members who are with us today, including 25-year members, Progress Career Planning Institute and Colonia Truhan Limited, 30-year members, CIBC, Deloitte Canada, and EY Canada. Yes, please, applause. 40-year member, BMO Financial Group. And a 50-year member, Insurance Bureau Canada. Let's give it up. To our new directors and to those members who have been with us for many years, thank you for your commitment and dedication. You make this Board of Trade stronger and the Toronto region a much, much, much better place to live. So thank you all. Please enjoy your lunch, and please be easy on me.
We're going to jump right into things. I know everyone's got busy afternoons, and we're really here to listen to His Worship, not to me. So we're very lucky today to have as our honored guest Toronto Mayor John Tory. As I mentioned earlier, this is the Mayor's 6th annual lunch with us. And let me just say from experience, as a former business executive, he understands the importance of a strong business environment for creating the enabling conditions for everyone in our city and our region. In fact, you may have heard him say it here before, that he's very positive about profitable businesses because we need to earn $1 of profit for him to take a tiny bit to help those in our community that might need a hand up. So this is a man who understands the importance of profit, which is very good news for our business members. Following Mayor Tory's keynote, we're going to sit down to have a conversation about where Toronto is as we exit the pandemic and where we're going. Mr. Mayor, with no further ado, over to you.
Well, Jan, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. And I am always wanting to acknowledge, even though our chair did it before, the presence of my colleagues who are here, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, who's had, I should say to you that during the pandemic, which was an experience, I'll call it once in a lifetime, you certainly hope it's once in a lifetime for a mayor or for any person, we had a core team of people who helped to sort of manage the city's affairs, and Michael was very much a part of that, convened a group that really helped working with Jan and others to look at the business end of things, and that complemented the team that consisted of Dr. Davila, of course, is our wonderful medical officer of health, our city manager, Chris Murray, and our fire chief, Matt Pegg, and former Councillor Joe Cressy, who is here, and he was just an indispensable part of why this city succeeded, and I'm so proud. I'm so proud for two reasons, to be able to go around and when I'm at Collision and other places and talk about our 90% vaccination rate, for example. I'm proud because it's an achievement that was not surpassed by any city like ours in the world. But I'm also proud because it represented something that Joe was a very indispensable part of, which was a determination we made early on in terms of how we dealt with the pandemic itself, but also how we dealt with vaccination, which is we were not going to let people get left behind. And that, I think, is a Toronto value, and I think it's something that was epitomized in the way we treated the pandemic, and we weren't perfect in dealing with it, but I think we had that value at the very core of what we did, and Joe and Michael and the others that I've mentioned were an indispensable part of that. Gary Crawford, our budget chief, is here, and of course I need say no more about his job, and it's a tough job. Councillor Mantis, Councillor Bradford, both of whom have been, again, we worked as a team during the pandemic, and Councillor Joe Mihevik, who is back serving us for a period of time to fill in for Joe's departure from the City Council. So we're delighted to have him, and of course former Councillor Josh Cole is here as well. I also just want to say the board was also an indispensable partner during that period of time. There was a lot of work that needed to be done, and we had so much to do in trying to manage the pandemic in a big city like this, that to make sure we stayed abreast of what was going on with business, and what businesses' needs were and how we were going to help shape a recovery, which we're still in the process of trying to do. And Jan was a great leader, and the board was a great leader in carrying that out, and I'm most grateful for that. I expect, Jan, in the new world, now that the pandemic hopefully is going to be coming to an end, and you're in new premises with this deck, I expect that I'll find you in a Muskoka chair now, just sitting there looking at the lake. I want to tell you, it's tough for me, though. You may think the pandemic was bad. It's much worse afterwards, because during all those morning television appearances answering questions about the pandemic, which had no answers, I didn't have to wear any pants for months. It was fantastic. Now I have to sort of actually wear pants when I come to give a speech like this, so it's much tougher. It's much tougher now. You know, and I'll mention one more thing, which I should, and then I've got to get to talking about what I'm going to talk about. And I'd ask if they could turn this clock on so that I could keep track of how long I'm speaking, since it's here. So if somebody could turn that on, that'd be fantastic. The team that we had, which was a team of people at the city and working with the Board of Trade, for example, among many other community and health organizations, was also a team that consisted of people from the labor movement. And Joseph Mancinelli is here. We had our own unions at the city who were incredibly cooperative in dealing with us in extraordinary circumstances. I know that other unions are represented here, like the carpenters, and I just want you to know this is typical of what was said by Jan in her opening remarks, which is that, and I just hope we can stay the course on this in the post-pandemic world, which is in the pandemic we didn't have any jurisdictional squabbles. We just had a job to do. We decided who was best to do it. We worked together to get it done, and that meant all hands on deck. And if ever there was a time now, coming out of the pandemic, when we're trying to have a recovery that is strong and durable, the same approach should apply. In fact, it probably is needed to apply even more so now because there has been damage done, and I'm going to make some reference to that as we go through. And so I just want to say thank you as well to the people from the labor movement that are represented here today for what they did. You know, if you want to sort of look at not going back to what was previously the status quo, we should forget the jurisdictional squabbles. They accomplish nothing. I've never been interested in them to begin with because I think they just interfere with getting the job done. We should accept the fact that we found ways to do things at wartime speed that we've been told couldn't be done at wartime speed. And it proved that. Joe knows that. There were things they said, you know, we needed this done by tomorrow afternoon. Oh, it can't possibly be done. There's got to be 2 studies and a consultant, and no offense to consultants, and you know, various things, and 4 city council committee meetings and so forth, and we just got them done. And we also established a standard that said, and this is the standard we have to, if there's one message I want you to carry away from today in terms of what I'm going to be trying to do going forward, is that there is no reason why this city has to accept adequate as a standard. You can accept adequate, and you know, adequate's kind of okay. It's like getting a C on your report card. I brought home the odd C in days gone by, and thank goodness my dad in particular always said to me, well, is that the best you can do? And he never said it was bad. He just said it was at the best you could do because he knew what my answer would have to be, which was that a C was not the best I could do. I knew that. But for Toronto, adequate is not the best we can do. If you were in the hallways of Collision this week, you would be proud of the city and how people see us. And they see us in a very certain way because of the smart people who are here, because of the success that we've had, because of the, but more than anything else, they see us as being successful because of our values. And those values include the value that says you don't leave people behind. It's the value that says an excellent public education is something we willingly invest in because it produces all the smart people. It's something that says that you make sure you do have a profitable and prosperous economy so that you can take that tiny bit that Jan referred to and do good with it to help people who might need support in some way or other. And all I can say is when you hear that, it only reinforces my desire to get on with a very strong recovery for the city so that we can be as excellent as we are, as we have been, and as we're capable of being going forward. Still haven't got that clock going yet. I'm sure at about 6 minutes already. Only on page 2. It's not good. I think in looking at the recovery, which is something I do want to speak to you about because it's something that's all-consuming for me at the moment, is to sort of help to set the path with you to put the city on course to have a strong recovery so that we can be stronger than ever. It is first important for us to remind ourselves that no matter how bad a storm that we're in, no matter how bad the storm that we're in, whether it's in business or in politics or in life, storms do come to an end. And even in the darkest days of a crisis, there's a tomorrow, and there's the next day, and there's the day after that. And each of those days usually continues to just to get brighter. But recoveries, or the days after a storm, require some planning, too, if you're going to take advantage of the fact things are getting better. And it requires a commitment that we're going to make to come back stronger than ever, and that commitment to excellence that I referred to, and that commitment to working together. So that's one of the reasons why I have been talking about the recovery as much as I have been, because I think we have to commit ourselves to all of those things if it's going to work. The fundamentals are all there. The fundamentals are all there, you know, for this city to be as great as it was and to be greater than it was in every respect, including the way in which we're seen to look after each other and to support each other. I've tried during the time that I've been the mayor to deliver steady, responsible leadership. They write me up as boring and bland, and I learned from my mentor, Premier Bill Davis, that bland works. And actually, it's not about how much excitement you create. You got to do the odd exciting thing. I thought wearing no pants on television, even though people didn't know, is pretty exciting. But you know, it's just the steady partnerships, for example. I have made it a hallmark of what I've tried to do as mayor to work with the provincial and federal governments because I understand the fact that this city cannot grow itself into a great success by itself. It's partly the way our system is set up, but it's also just the reality that if you can't work with the federal and provincial governments, you can't get done the big things that have to get done. Look at our transit program. We finally got all 3 governments to agree on what the transit would be, what lines would be built, and put the money up. We've never really had a plan like that that everybody agreed to. We had somebody over here that agreed on this and somebody over here that agreed on that, but we now have a plan and we're building it. It's actually under construction. I'm sorry for the disruption that causes, but it's a good thing. So going forward, those kinds of partnerships are going to be as important as they've ever been with the provincial and federal governments. And I'm committed to those partnerships, but I'm also committed to taking the people that have lost so much during the pandemic, and that's included a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and making sure that they get the support they need so that the recovery can be one that is stronger than ever, and so that each of those businesses and each of those people can achieve everything they're capable of achieving. And that means that we have to continue to work hard, and Collision was a great experience this week for us to be able to sort of show people what we had, because there were people here, I think, from 120 countries, 35,000 plus people visiting our city, and they could see what we had physically and looking around, but they could also feel it in being on that very convention floor that I was talking about. And we have to continue to attract new businesses. You know, again, we're a relatively small country. We're also a relatively small city that punches way above its weight. And that requires us to have the support of people who come here to invest, whether it's from Alberta or from Albania or from wherever. People have to come here to invest, and we want the best and the brightest to want to come and live here. You know, the New York Times recently wrote a wonderful article, and if you haven't seen it, I should send a copy to everybody, and it referred to Toronto as the quietly booming tech town. And it said that in our own quiet way, we had sort of snuck up on everybody and become one of the major global tech centers and one of the biggest in all of North America. And Patty Cosgrave was telling the story, Michael Thompson was there last night, of how they came to locate Collision here. And when they moved it from New Orleans, they were under great pressure to put it in San Francisco or Chicago. And he said, no, you know, I think the place that's really sort of taking off, because they've got such immense talent and such a diverse, you know, population, and they have the right values and so on and so forth. I'm paraphrasing a bit of what he said. He picked Toronto. And he was right about that. You know, the Toronto Star had a headline recently, Netflix chooses Toronto for its Canadian corporate headquarters. And we had furious competition. And I take this competition in a certain way that you'd expect as a proud Canadian. I don't mind when Vancouver wins something, and they were our competitors for the Netflix head office. We got it. And I think we got it because of all the right stuff that we have here. And Vancouver's a great city too, you know. Just yesterday, Sanofi announced that their new artificial intelligence center of excellence would be located here in Toronto. And this goes on day after day, week after week. But we can't take that for granted. The world has taken notice of the growth and the success story that is Toronto and the values that lie behind that. But I think that you also know, just from reading yesterday's news about inflation and things like that, that we face some very challenging times going forward. And I think it's going to take everything we've got, every partnership we have, every smart person that we have available to us, some new smart people we need to welcome into this city by way of immigration to deal with those problems. But I think we can get it done. I will say, modestly, for me, I have a track record of achieving real results by working with the City Council, bringing the city together, working with the other governments, and working with business and labor and academe and everybody in every walk of life, because that is what it takes to make a city successful. Nothing less than that. Nothing less. No one can do it on their own. And now what we have to do is to take the progress that has been considerable, that stopped or paused to some extent at the time of the pandemic, and continue with it, but also to protect it. We've got to protect the progress that we made before the pandemic hit. I'm going to be focused on 5 key pillars in terms of economic recovery. We've got to rebuild, and that means a lot of enterprises that were hurt and have to rebuild themselves, and even just in the task of getting people to come back to work. And I realize that will change. That's something I'm going to make reference to, that may be a transformational change in terms of how people work. But we've got to get people back to the downtown core. It's not all about downtown. People in this room know I'm as committed to the entire city as I am to downtown. But the health and vitality of this part of the city is very important to the economy of the city and of this country. We've got to maintain an environment that instills confidence among people who are here in this part of the city. And when it's not full up and as dynamic as it can be, that confidence isn't going to be as great. We have to attract new businesses and talent. I made reference to that, and encourage the expansion of existing businesses. Not a week goes by where I am not privileged to be welcoming new investment into the city, going to help someone open a new office or a new R&D software engineering center or something like that. And we've got to carry on with that. I think the announcement that we made of Toronto Inc. that was made reference to by Jan was very, very important, because again, it speaks to partnership. Those organizations all did a good job before, a great job before. But the fact is, you could go to international meetings where there'd be 3 different booths, and they'd be fairly small because they're all modest in the way they go about doing things. And Destination Toronto would have one, and Toronto Global might have one, and even the City of Toronto might have a third one. We can't afford to do it that way anymore. We got to have a big presence at these places to fit with our big ambitions and with our big reputation as a city. And the Board of Trade is going to be a partner in that, and I think it's going to be a great thing. And hats off to the CEOs who said, you know what, it's not all about our own individual mandates and kind of protecting our own turf. It's about getting together and showing that 2 and 2 equals way more than 4. And I think you're going to find that organization, aptly named Toronto Inc., is going to be a powerhouse when it comes to getting visitors, investors, people to come and live here, the kinds of things we need to power this economy. We have to support businesses, and I say especially small businesses, because if you really look at it, if you really think about it, they were much harder hit, in the pandemic than were some of the larger businesses. Larger businesses had the resources and the wherewithal to carry on in many different ways. Small businesses often didn't. So I'm proud that with the support of the City Council, we created a small business tax class, and that resulted in a significant property tax reduction for tens of thousands of small businesses in this city. And there are things like Cafe TO that we've done that are helping restaurants who struggled so much during the pandemic when they were closed to get back on their feet and to have some of the revenue. And I think it's changed the look and feel of the city for the better. I get complaints about it, but this is part of the balancing act you have to deal with in public life. The clock started up 3 times. It's only 1 minute and 31 seconds now. It's fantastic. We have to support growth. We've had huge success in the film, television, and digital production industry. $2.5 billion of production in this city last year. 35,000 jobs depend on it. We've got to repeat that same thing, which is happening with tech, but it's not going to happen by accident. We have to repeat it with life sciences, financial services, and just keep that kind of growth going. And it's going to require innovation, and it's going to require determination to do those things. And then, last but not least, of the 5 pillars I've mentioned, we're going to have to be ready for the future. And this is going to include, for example, a fundamental re-examination of the future of work. I don't know the answer to the question of whether the work habits of people have changed permanently, in which case that has profound implications for business. I believe it has profound implications for the career development of those very same people. I'm old-fashioned enough, I guess, to believe that if you're not in the office, getting some face time, listening and being mentored, getting advice and so on, that your career is not going to develop as well. So therefore, you're not well advised to work at home all the time, even though there's some comfort in that, including not having to wear pants. But when I do surveys, I've been out at 3 or 4 events in the last couple of weeks where I've asked hundreds of people, do you think the changes that have happened about working at home are permanent? 90% of people put their hand up. I don't think they're right about that, but we've got to ask that question and ask it of people who's not me. What do I know? Any more than I knew during the pandemic, other than to ask Eileen Davila, our expert in medical health. So I'm going to be convening a group of leaders from all sectors of the economy. It's not that big, but it's going to be a group that is representative, and I'm going to put some of these questions to them because we need to have the best answers we can get, because we need to get those answers as right as we can get them in order to have the city power itself forward into a strong recovery. I want to think about the kind of things that I have to worry about with my colleagues in that regard. If people don't come back to work on Mondays and Fridays ever, as they say they're not going to, then the fact that they're working from home, I understand that, but they're not on Monday and Friday on the transit system. And what that means is a huge revenue shortfall for the transit system, because the cost of running the system for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and for the people who do go to work Monday and Friday stays about the same. You can make some changes around the edges, and that creates a huge problem for us. And so these are the kinds of things that we need, and that's just one small example of the kinds of questions that we have to answer and the reasons why we have to answer them. I think that these people that are going to be put in place and will have their names and their mandate in the very few days ahead are going to provide helpful perspectives in thinking about the city's future. And for those who question, and I know people sometimes can't stand it when I go on national television programs and say Toronto's the economic engine of Canada. Well, you know what? It's true. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, I don't say that in a boastful way. I say it in a way that I have to recognize the reality of how important it is for me and my colleagues and for all of us to keep the city strong for the benefit of this country that we love so much. I view my job as keeping the Toronto economy strong as much as for the people of Toronto, but also for the well-being of this country. 20% of the country's GDP is right here in the Toronto region. 38% of Canada's business headquarters are located here, and we're the 2nd largest financial centre in all of North America and the 3rd largest tech sector. That is a city that needs to be nurtured, it needs to be cared for, it needs to have a strong recovery for the benefit, yes, of the 3 million people who live here, but for the benefit of this entire country. And I don't have to make that case often to the people who lead this province and in this country, because the same is true, of course, of Ontario, but sometimes you do. Because sometimes there is a consciousness about saying, well, we have to make sure Toronto doesn't get too much, or it doesn't look like they're getting too much support for this or for that. Well, you give support where it is needed the most in the context of what you need to do to invest in and to build a strong country and a strong province by having a strong city here. And that's work that I am not going to give up on, because Canada's success is Toronto's success, and Toronto's success is Canada's success. And people don't like to hear me say that, but it is the truth, and it is something that I will never stop saying. So these are the challenges that are in front of us. I'm sure notwithstanding the clock is at zero. It's stood at zero most of the time. I'm an optimist, and I have been through the pandemic. You know why? And people ask me, when people were a bit gloomy during the pandemic, I say, no, just stop for a minute and think about this. The smart people are still here. They never went anywhere. And we kept producing them. Actually, people kept going to college, even though it was virtual and not as good during the pandemic. They kept going to school. They kept training themselves. The unions were doing a good job in partnership with that, making sure people got properly trained. The world still looked at us, and I think this has a lot to do with our way of life and our quality of life and our values, including our commitment to culture and the arts. Very, very important. If you want to be seen as being committed to innovation and to creativity, then be committed for that reason and 100 others to the arts, as we have done unfailingly. And Councillor Gary Crawford is a great supporter of that. But they've seen all of these things. But I think most importantly, and I've learned this, when I've been traveling on behalf of the city trying to sell it, that they've seen that our values have remained intact. And when I went to Los Angeles to sell the film industry just 2 weeks ago, to protect that business that I mentioned earlier, I started off, you have your sales pitch kind of ready when you get there. Everybody's been through this that sells, and I'm selling Toronto. And I started off and was talking all about things I've talked about today, the smart people and all that. And they're all very important things, and people recognize those. But in the first 2 meetings, and Michael Thompson was there, they said, one of the reasons people want to keep coming to Toronto is because it's stable. And because there are things going on in other parts of the world, including some of the places that compete with us. And I'm never going to be critical of Americans and of the great resiliency and, frankly, the fact that they're our best friends and our best customers, and we need them and we love them. But they're saying there's things going on that are disconcerting. And, everybody's heard me say, everywhere I speak now, I make sure I finish with this by to say, look, we have to push back against that kind of division and push back against that kind of polarization. And I was so glad to hear the people in the film industry feeding that back to me and saying they knew there was something a bit different about this place. It's not perfect, but that we're committed to supporting each other. We're committed to making sure people aren't left behind. We're not achieving perfection on that at all yet, but we have work to do on that. We're committed to not letting that kind of bitterness and anger that seems to have set in so many places overtake the city. We cannot do that, because that is the source of our greatest strength. That is what I think makes this a magnet for people from around the world. They come because they know no matter what their faith, what their color of skin, what their nationality, what their sexual orientation, they know they'll be accepted, they'll be embraced, we will get the best out of them, and we will celebrate those differences as a source of strength. So, on with the recovery. I need your help. This is something we're going to get done together. We're going to be back on top the way we were at 2019. We still are there, but we need to stay there and do even better. It's that standard, that excellence that I talked about at the beginning. I look forward to that challenge. It's going to be challenging times. I look forward to working with the board, with this magnificent new chair. I said to him, do you need your head read taking on an assignment like that as a volunteer? But I'm so glad that he did, and I'll look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, we're talking about the challenges that we still face, and you've been a big part of helping us solve things across the economic zone, because our financial district workers are living all over the corridor and coming in from different parts. How are we going to get our municipalities in the corridor to continue to work together to build a big parade for action on the important issues that we're facing, like housing, like talent development, like movement of people, movement of goods? Your thoughts on that, and in doing so, share some of the work you've already been doing to foster that.
I just think we have to continue to work together, and I'm proud of the fact that during the pandemic we brought together the 11 biggest municipalities in southern Ontario representing probably about 6 or 7 million people, and we met every single Monday and compared notes on how we could help each other during the pandemic, how we could share information with each other to make us stronger. And then what's happened, as you would expect, is as those meetings have continued, we've started to talk about other things. So I'm proud to tell you, for example, that those very same 11 municipalities reached an agreement on how we could deal together, collectively, with Ukrainian displaced people, so that we would not for a minute miss a beat if somebody was not able to house someone that was landing here from there to flee that unbelievable atrocity, that if Toronto wasn't able to help, Hamilton would, or if Hamilton wasn't able to, the region of York would. And so I think this is typical of what we will do going forward. And I think it has struck a chord positively with the provincial and federal governments as well, that they can see that not only is there strength in numbers in the 11 of us working together, but I think they can see it's easier for them to deal with 11 cities representing 6 or 7 million people all together on a topic, whether it's refugees or anything else, than it is to deal with all 11 separately. And so I'm very committed to that. I'm very committed to that in the context of what Toronto Global represents. And while we've had, some aches and growing pains, I was actually one of the originators of the idea of having all of the regions in the GTA work together to attract foreign investment. Consistent with what I said about being a proud Canadian, I'm actually not quite as happy if an investment goes to Brampton as to Toronto, but I'm happy because I know that whatever that business is in Brampton is going to buy things from Toronto, send people to live here, hire people from Toronto. It's going to be good for the region. And so we're going to work together, and that's what Toronto Inc. is all about. It's not just about Toronto, it's about Toronto and the region and the country.
We've got a couple of our members that had questions they wanted to ask. I know GTAA is one. Leslie, could I get a mic to Karen? Thanks.
Mayor Tory, the GTA to Toronto Pearson is the welcome mat, sort of the first impression people get when you come to Toronto. We've been facing some pretty serious passenger delays. The feds have come in and
Oh, sorry, Karen. I think the mic needs to be switched on. Sorry.
So I'm representing the GTA, and the airport is really the first impression people get, business leaders and visitors get coming to Toronto. We've seen a lot of passenger delays of late. The federal government has stepped in recently to address some of these. So I'd love to get your impressions and some of your thoughts about how to address some of these issues when it comes to passenger delays, and some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree. That's our front door. And that's the first impression people had. I remember, I'm old enough to remember the old days of the old Terminal 1, and some of you will remember it. And when you got off the plane, if you came from somewhere else other than Canada, you walked in this tunnel with no windows. It was the most awful. Like, you would have thought maybe they were walking you along the corridor to your prison cell. And that was the first impression people got. And then we built this wonderful new airport. But I was saying to Jan at lunchtime, we built this wonderful new airport, but now the wonderful new airport is about, 10 or 12 years old? And it needs investment. And it's just part of what we're talking about here. If we want to be not adequate, because our airport is adequate in terms of, it's maybe better than adequate, but it's not excellent the way it was when it first opened. So we've got to invest in the airport, and that's a fundamental investment in economic development and economic prosperity and tourism. But also we have to make sure operationally that it works well. And I'm prepared to understand, because, look, people could be critical of things that we've done at the city or other places because the pandemic took its toll. You were sort of coming out of the pandemic and maybe hadn't exactly thought things would happen in the order they happened or at the time they happened. But I think it's time now, and I think they've taken some very definitive steps to make it better. But we've got the peak travel season coming up, and I just hope that, I quite seriously offered one day in the media, and I said, if they want me to send 100 people out there from City Hall, because, they could perform some function or other. I'm not saying the people at the airport don't have to be trained and have security clearance, but there would have been some jobs those 100 people could have done to keep the place going, while the people who fill those jobs, could do some of the ones that maybe require some of that special training or expertise in the airport. And I meant that very seriously, but we've just got to make sure that that's part of what's all hands on deck. We've got to keep building the infrastructure, keep improving the infrastructure, keep investing in things like the airport, make sure they run well, because those are the first impressions people have of this city and of this country. I said that, and again, I'm sure it just aggravates. I'm sure people throw shoes at their TVs when they see me saying this stuff. But I said, this is the gateway to all of Canada. I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm sure it's a very high percentage of all the people that come into this country and maybe catch a connecting flight to somewhere else, they come here first. And so if they get a bad impression here, it's going to give a bad impression to Winnipeg if that's where they're on the way to, because they're going to think, well, that's what this place is about. So I hope we can do better, but I understand some of the operational challenges that have been faced. We have to do better than we were doing a couple of months ago, and it's getting better.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Next question is from Enbridge. Leslie?
Just over here. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Patrick with Enbridge here. Really appreciate your remarks about kind of the region. I was hoping if you could maybe shed some light a little bit on kind of Transform TO. There's a very ambitious plan that the city's come up with. Still lots of reports to come out with. Just if you can maybe shed some light on kind of your thoughts on what Transform TO and kind of your views on the energy transition might look like in the years to come.
Transform TO, for those who don't know, is our climate change plan that has us with very ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals by 2030 and 2040. And we've joined other cities around the world in setting very ambitious goals for ourselves, but it's going to require us to take action, and we've begun to do that. I was at a tremendously innovative project launch the other day, for example, and this is where technology and climate change come together. And you know, Young and I were talking about this, the importance of innovation and creativity, and I've met several startups even here at this lunch today that introduced themselves. The importance of having that present in our city is underlined by the fact that this firm that is going to take the wastewater that comes out of the Toronto Western Hospital and is going to take heat out of it sufficient that they will eventually not have to use natural gas to heat and cool that hospital anymore. And it's using the wastewater and a piece of technology that, of course, requires an investment. And we've partnered with that firm and with the City of Toronto to make that investment in putting that, I don't even know what it's called, but let's say it's a heat exchanger, into the ground by the hospital. The construction started on that. But we have to replicate those things over and over again. I'm proud to tell you we have the largest fleet of in-operation electric buses in North America. We have to keep our leadership position by buying more and more of those. That requires the support of the other governments. So we have an extensive plan, and the biggest question that is out there, as is the case with many things, is how are we going to pay for it? But I will just say to you, and I want to say this with regard to housing, because I didn't mention housing enough. You mentioned it during your own remarks, because if there's a hallmark issue, you know, that is going to stand in any way and stand in the way of the kind of progress and excellence that I talked about and the recovery, or on the other hand could be a springboard for us to do even better, it is going to be our success at dealing with the challenge of affordable housing. And that's going to be all hands on deck. But so too is our commitment to innovation, because by putting that technology together, by taking the risks, by making the bets, and by having the financing to switch our fleet over to electric, to retrofit our buildings, starting perhaps with our public buildings, that is how we're going to achieve our goals. It's not something where the government is going to do it by itself. This is something everybody has to take a part in. But we have programs, and the question that is going to confront me and my colleagues and the other governments is how are we going to pay for them? And I think the good news is all the governments are committed to this, and so I think we will find the resources to do it. It's also a source of great jobs and great prosperity for us. You know, this whole, the green economy. I met with the delegation from Luxembourg, and people may say Luxembourg, it's, you know, it's a very small country. Well, I think it's actually the richest country in the whole world, but they have there a green stock exchange now, and it's a separate stock exchange that operates where people can trade in the ownership of green companies. And I sort of thought there's something I could take away from that in terms of green finance. But the bottom line is that it's going to require us to sort of really focus in on those companies and nurture them and support them. It can create a lot of jobs here, and they're the ones that are going to have the answers. And then we have to make sure that we can support them both privately in terms of private capital and also publicly in terms of the investment we make in the buses and in the transit systems and in the retrofits of the public buildings.
So we've got time for one last question. You spoke about the urgency that, you know, the success we had during the pandemic of collaborating and being hyper focused on making things happen, but how critically important it is that we continue to do that now. And I'm going to warn folks, you're going to hear the Board of Trade saying hit go a lot in the coming year, and it's about not doing another study. It's about what can we do to put something into action. So we've got the municipal election happening in October. But what are you hitting go on right now? What needs to happen right now that can't wait for that election to be over?
Housing. And I want to say something. First of all, we really do need all three governments to buy in. Just like I said about everything else, all these big projects. We bought into a $28 billion transit program. It's happening. I mean, you can drive around the city and see it being built. In fact, you probably cursed it because you're sitting in the midst of the construction. But that's a good news story. Because when it's finished, it's going to be great for the environment, it's going to be great for getting people around, it's going to be great for giving people access to opportunity from some of the neighborhoods that, you know, find it more difficult to connect up to the prosperity that is possible here. So it's a great story. But now we have to do the same thing with housing. So first it requires all three governments to be there to invest. Your city government, you know, you don't think of us as making multi-billion-dollar investments because we make them in different ways. We don't have big announcements to say we're handing over a check to somebody for billions of dollars. But your city government has, in the last few years, invested, or we're in the process of investing over time, I think the number is about $7 billion. And we do it through deferred taxes later on, through deferred development charges and things, so that we can then guarantee that some of the apartments that are built as a result of our deferring those charges will remain affordable for people, the first-year teacher, the first-year police officer, the first-year person working in a bank, who don't make enough money to be able to live in the city. And we need those people to live in the city. We need the kind of city that is welcoming to people from all different income groups, not just people who are comfortable and those who are struggling. And so it is very important that we get this right with respect to housing. And I will say one last thing in answering this question. The people in this room are going to be very important to our success in doing this, because there's a lot of people who, for reasons I understand, at face value, see protecting the status quo in our city as being something that it is their mission to do. If you've got 70,000 people coming to this city every year, and thank God they're coming to grow our economy and to be a vote of confidence in our city, if you've got the challenges of a very expensive city in front of us, which we do, we cannot afford to just say the status quo is adequate. I'll tell you one very short story. I stood the other day in this magnificent new Michael Garron hospital wing that's been built. I think it's called the Ken and Marilyn Thompson Patient Care Wing, and it's beautiful, and it hasn't been occupied yet. And I was standing looking out the window, and I don't want to scare the neighborhoods in the Danforth, and if they don't like what I'm saying, well, then we can have that discussion during the election campaign. But I looked at the Danforth, which is right there, and all along the Danforth, where we built a subway like 50 years ago, there's nothing of the kind of 5, 6, 7, stories that you see all over in the great cities of the world, whether it's in New York or whether it's in Europe. We need that housing to be built, especially where we have public transit. But one of the reasons it's not built, let's be honest, is because people push back and say, well, I don't really, I know we need that housing, but maybe not just there. We should do it maybe over there somewhere else, much further away. We have to understand that we can protect our neighborhoods, we can keep their character, but we have to move off the status quo and do it in a tasteful, thoughtful, high-quality way, but we have to do it. And it's something I'm going to be talking about during the election campaign, because the city has no alternative. We will not be the success that I've talked about going forward if we don't have places for people to live. People are just going to stop coming, or they're going to be struggling even more than some people are struggling now to find housing. And that's not an acceptable state of affairs. I think you all know that. So I need your help with that as we go forward together.
So that's the call to action for all of us. The things that we did really, really well during the pandemic, coming together as a business community to solve problems around communications and confidence for our workers, and the protocols that we needed to put in place, working closely with the mayor, with council, with City Hall. Collectively, we've got to keep that momentum going. That's what Hitting Go is going to be all about. So, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you so much for joining us for the 6th annual luncheon. Not the last, but the 6th, we're hoping. I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. It's incredible to think 177 years. I'm looking pretty good for somebody who's been here since 1845, or feels like it some days. But yeah, it was also incredible to reflect on the fact that it's almost 50 years ago before we allowed the first woman as a member, which I think it's a sign of progress. We're all kind of shocked. It just seems like a weird phenomenon. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you for everything you do. To our city councilors, thank you. You don't get thanks often enough. And to all of you, thank you for joining us here today. Don't wait 2 years to come back for another event, okay? We hope to see you soon, and we hope to see you often at 100 Queens Quay at our new location. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you soon.